International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, the International Convention for the Protection of All Forms of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Picks Global at www.hopepyxglobal.org.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Miss Texas Show. Guess who I have in our room today? My special guest, my friend, Miss London Bell, and she wears many hats and titles. So I'm just gonna share with you a few of her highlighted titles and let her do the introduction herself. And she is the founder and president of the Bell Global Justice Institute and the former secretary of the UNA-USA National Council. Welcome, London.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, Eileen. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I have been so looking forward to having you today. As you know, we are in the month of March. It's such an exciting month. We're celebrating women. It's the Women's History Month. On top of that, you and I are both honored to be the UN Women's CSW 68th delegate. So, and you know, I'm so excited to talk about this topic and on top of your areas of expertise. But first of all, tell us more about yourself besides those titles and all the work that you do.
Oh, thank you, Eileen. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be here. I am from Detroit, Michigan. I am a lawyer, community organizer, I'm an activist, and I am trained in international human rights law and policy, criminal justice, and international trade law. In addition to my work with Bell Global Justice Institute and United Nations Association, UNA-USA, in 2020, I also served as a fellow for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, an African descent fellow through their International Decade for People of African Descent. And that's a highly competitive fellowship. People of African descent from around the world compete to become a part of this fellowship program. I was very blessed to be a fellow in 2020, where I was trained for 3 weeks on the international human rights law framework and the mechanisms and how to use that system in order to advance the human rights of people of African descent here in the United States and around the world. So I do a lot of work around gender equality, intersectionality, and so yeah, that's what I do.
Like I said, you're a woman of so many traits, and I can only imagine how competitive it is to be part of this fellowship, and it is very very well deserved for you. Congratulations again. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
you founded the Global Justice Institute. Can you tell us more about the organization? What do you all do exactly?
Yes, yes. So actually, this month, we are celebrating, I believe it's 8 years. So we launched it in 2016, and the institute is actually named in honor of my brother, Staff Sergeant Vincent James Bell, who was a U.S. Marine, and he was killed in Afghanistan in 2011. And so I created this organization in honor of his service and his legacy. And all of our work is in his honor. And so, what we do is we work to advance and promote the human rights and human dignity of women and girls here at home and around the world. And a lot of what we do is bring together it's really the global and local issues that women and girls face here at home and around the world. We bring those issues together, and we try to connect local advocates in gender equality to the global system. And so a lot of what we do is we do workshops in Metro Detroit, human rights workshops, workshops around the UN. We talk about the UN treaties with young people. We participate in different sessions at the UN through writing shadow reports to inform the UN about issues that women and girls are facing at home and around the world. So we're doing that work to advance gender equality in general.
That's great work. And, thank your brother for the service for our country. Yes, it's very complex. There's the international rule of law, the US law, then there's the federal and the states. And as someone who is not from the criminal justice and or the law background, what can you tell people? We mentioned about CSW, about the framework, either as a member state of the United States or, other member states. What are some of the mechanisms that's related to CSW historically, if you can maybe go with the chronological order, please?
Yeah. So I'm very proud to participate in CSW. So the CSW, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, I believe was established in 1946. And it is designed to fully focus on the issues that women and girls face around the world. This year in March, the UN is doing its 68th session, and the focus is going to be the rights of women and girls in the context of eliminating poverty. That's the international theme. And every year, about 10,000 or more people gather in New York to focus exclusively on the rights of women and girls. And so the UN will, for 2 weeks in March, this year it's March 11th through the 22nd, we'll have sessions inside the UN as side events where different countries will host discussions. And then alongside those country official side events, there will be what is called parallel events, which are hosted by members of civil society. And so there are going to be discussions all throughout New York City. And I'm excited because Bell Global Justice Institute has hosted several parallel events over the years in either in New York or virtually. So it is a very important time. This year is also, we're celebrating International Women's Month and Women's Day, which is March 8th. And I think what I appreciate about what we're doing in the United States is that more and more members of civil society are recognizing the importance of participating in not only CSW, but commemorating International Women's Month in general. And so I'm starting to see a lot more conversations happening locally and nationally around women's issues, particularly women of color. And I will say that the United States participates within this international system in a variety of ways, which we can talk about later in the program. But in general, I'm happy that we're going to be a part of CSW.
Yes, it's very overwhelming. You and I had meeting with another of our leaders recently this week, and I realized I wasn't the only person who is going mad with my schedule, and we are all like, having so many. And you mentioned about all the events. As far as I understand, it's I think 800 to 1,000 events. I can't really wrap my head around it, trying to say how can we split ourselves, but it is very empowering to have leaders around the world, over 10,000 people all gathered in the same city to make meaningful changes together, with leaders like yourself. So that is amazing. You talked about, introduced the theme of the CSW 68, which is addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. What is your view about seeing, like, what changes you would like to see during this session?
Yeah, I think it's important to address the ways in which poverty significantly impact women and girls, particularly from an intersectional perspective. You have women and girls around the world, even here at home, who are living in poverty because they are living within multiple marginalized identities. You have women and girls who are disabled, who are living in poverty because they may be receiving some sort of aid or Social Security, and there are restrictions to earning additional funds. And so you also have women and girls who are experiencing poverty when it comes to housing, and that are not being paid a living wage. And so when women and girls are not allowed to, or prevented from earning a living wage, from being able to have access to resources, women and girls become more vulnerable to violence, to gender-based violence, to trafficking, to, domestic violence. There are so many ways that poverty, violence, and the impact on human rights are all connected. And I'm hoping that those are the kind of things that will be addressed at CSW. And I'm also hopeful that these issues will be addressed through many different types of voices from many different spaces, so that we're hearing from a diverse group of women and girls in all of our identities. That's what I'm hoping that we can accomplish at CSW.
I'm so glad that you mentioned about the intersection, because that was going to be my next question for you. As you know, our podcast, TheMsTexasShow, we have had leaders like yourself specifically covering the subjects of human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and gender-based violence. So this is something essential, as you know, like people like you and I, who are now dealing with the work, and the UN is like a massive system with different agencies, and people were like, okay, what does that have to do with me? Or even people working in the space of anti-gender based violence, they were like, okay, so that's me, and that's you, and that's the UN, and how can we fit in? So what advice would you give to, like, not even the civil society, maybe just like helpful citizen who is aware of the situation, but they were like, yeah, this is something very far away. I don't think I have either the resources or the qualification. What kind of advice would you give to them to be a part of this global change?
That is a very good question, Eileen, and it's a question that I get asked a lot, particularly young people who really do see like the UN to be like a really massive institution that's difficult to navigate. And I think that the UN system, the international system, is so vital in helping to advance grassroots activism and to alert the global community about what's happening locally. And I think one of the ways that people can get involved is to make sure that they are familiarizing themselves with the way that the UN works, understanding some of the mechanisms that are already in place, reading up on things like the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW. The UN's sessions are actually sessions that you can download, or not download, but you can actually stream. Going to the UN's website, you can actually stream sessions. So when you're trying to learn about gender equality, just looking that up and finding out what the UN is doing around gender equality and how your country is participating. For instance, the United States is participating in some of these mechanisms. And so visiting the US State Department's website and finding out how we are participating in these mechanisms are important. There's always an opportunity for members of civil society, people like you and me, to give input into these sessions. And so whenever there's an opportunity to do so, take that opportunity. And so connecting with people like you, Eileen, people like me, people like Lady T, who are familiar with these mechanisms is a good way to start. And then taking the time, reading through reports, downloading sessions, and trying to find out, because there are people in other parts of the world that are experiencing the same issues that we're experiencing at home. So trying to connect with those people abroad, which is why CSW is so important, because it not only allows for us to have those discussions, it allows for us to also connect with each other and to learn best practices. What are you doing here? What are we doing here? And to stay in touch and partner. So those are the kind of things I would encourage people to do.
Thank you so much for the insights, because I was just in a meeting earlier today, and most people have either no knowledge or sometimes might be a misconception of what exactly is behind this, massive system. And so that's really helpful. And again, you're amazing. You're ahead of me. I was going to ask you about the youth leadership, and you already touched upon that. So that was my next question for you. As we in the UN system and advocates and for the UN talk about so many different approaches, youth leader is one of the approaches that we're focusing on with HopeX Global, because after all, we are trying to really make our communities safer from the perpetrators in our community for our youth. So they have to play a role in there. We are, although, we have the age that comes with the experience, but they are the ones who are actually, whether, in the unfortunate situation when it comes to human trafficking, online grooming, or when it comes to what comes with it, the social media. And I'm learning all kinds of different terminologies. The Generation Z, I think it's called Generation Z, and Millennium, and the different terminologies. And then I heard about, when we were talking earlier about the podcast, we were trying to do it, say 30 minutes, because I saw their attention span. One day, literally, I was sitting next to them. They were swiping the screen just like that. Okay, I think I'm counting like 5 seconds like that. Yeah. So I think getting their involvement is key to, let's say if I want to get awareness, and if I think my way, I will never get their attention. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts? I love to pick your brain on how people who are in the space, whether it's fighting gender-based violence, whether it's improving poverty and eliminating the financial obstacles so that they can have all the justice and equality for their life. What are your input?
Yeah, when it comes to particularly young people and encouraging young people to take on those leadership roles, I think as more seasoned and experienced activists, we have to make sure that they understand that there is a space at the table for them. We have to make sure that we are opening those spaces, that we ensure that they understand that their voices are very valuable, and that they need to be at tables where decisions are being made. So we have to do that work to communicate that to young people. And then we have to set, we have to be a role model. We have to walk our walk, you know, talk our talk. We have to, you know, let them know that these things can be accomplished, that these issues can be addressed, and always from an intersectional perspective, because I believe in looking around at a table to see who's not at the table, who needs to be at the table, and making sure those individuals are at the table. I believe that tables should be as diverse as possible so that as many different voices can be making changes as possible. One thing that I always encourage young people and even seasoned activists to do is to get into policy work, is to really start engaging their law and policy makers on issues that they care about. And that means not only voting, but even after voting, engaging with law and policy makers, building those relationships so their local and national law and policy makers understand that these are the issues that we care about and this is what we need. And so I always encourage people, particularly young people, to use their voices in that way.
Thank you. I think it is so vital to be inclusive for youth and young people voices in this policy making. They are the future. And, you know, back to your areas of expertise that you are familiar with all the international treaties, and I'm gonna cover on CEDAW later. And I have learned that there are 9 core human rights treaties. And can you give us sort of like an outline of what they are?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is my favorite area of international law.
That's why I'm like saving the best to the last.
And so you are correct. There are 9, and I'm just going to name them if that's okay.
Yes.
So the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, the International Convention for the Protection of All Forms of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And then with those 9 core human rights treaties, there are additional protocols, optional protocols. I won't name those, but just know that there is additional information about those treaties. What I will say is that I'm always fascinated with the United States and its interaction and engagement with the UN. And though we have participated in the drafting and, you know, and amplifying of several different treaties, we only belong as state parties to about 3 of those treaties.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah. And so we are a state party to the International Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. So we belong to 3 of those treaties.
Yeah.
And what that means is that,
Oh, so sorry. Yes. So for our audience, we will put the list down below the content section. This way, if you're interested in any particular area, you can dive deeper in that. Please go ahead, Linda.
Yeah. And I really encourage people to do so. So when we belong to a treaty, that means we are legally obligated to implement the principles of that treaty. And we are also legally obligated to appear before the UN's expert committees for those treaties to talk about the progress we are doing in making sure we are following along with those treaty obligations. So because we only belong to 3, we only appear before those 3 committees that oversee those treaties. However, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has a mechanism to ensure that all member states, all countries, appear before the UN, regardless of how many treaties it belongs to. And this is through the Universal Periodic Review. So even though we only belong to 3 treaties, we do still appear before the Universal Periodic Review. It's a peer review where countries, all member states, get a chance to review all other member states on the progress of their human rights record. So, and we have a 100% participation in that process, which I'm proud of.
That's amazing. Back to the CEDAW, can you tell us what CEDAW is? And I know that we have had a session maybe about a month ago to bring the UN expert talking about CEDAW, and it's my understanding that the US had not signed on to that as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So CEDAW, again, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, was established, I believe, in 1979, late 70s. Our president at the time did sign the treaty. However, our Senate has not ratified the treaty. So we are not a state party for this treaty. And there is a movement for the United States to eventually, civil society is actively, moving to encourage the United States to sign on to this treaty, to ratify this treaty, but we have not. And so in lieu of us being a state party, civil society has started what is called Cities for CEDAW. And that is where civil society is encouraging local towns and cities across the United States to adopt the principles of CEDAW to protect the rights of women and girls. And so since for many years, there have been many cities across the United States that have adopted the principles of CEDAW. A lot of cities in California, Berkeley, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, who has been a leader in this process. And in fact, UNA San Francisco, a part of UNA USA, is a lead in this process. And then you have Broward County, Florida. So UNA USA has had many chapters that have been a part of this process. And so they have local governments adopt the principles of CEDAW. And this is a huge movement in the United States. And so eventually I do hope that we eventually I do hope that we ratify this important treaty to continue to show our leadership in human rights at home and abroad.
Thank you for the introduction. That's why, we call you the expert in this field. And I apologize for using the wrong word. I'm like, oh my God, did I say sign on? Ratify. Thank you for correcting me. Yes, and I recall that during that meeting, we learned, I think there were like 5 or 6 countries only left that has not ratified. And amongst them, majority are African countries. The US is one of the, I think, if I recall, the only advanced country there. So there leaves my question for you, for our audience who are listening, and particularly during the Women's History Month and the CSW, what is some takeaway that you would like to leave with our audience?
Yes, and you spoke about CEDAW and that we're one of very few countries that has not ratified. In fact, for the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we are the only country that has not ratified that treaty. So what I would encourage or takeaways I would offer is for people to really read up on these treaties, learn about what's included in these treaties, and then learn about, if you're in the United States, learn about the role of the United States in being a part of these treaties and why we're not a part of these treaties, and join our movement to encourage the U.S. to sign on to these treaties.
Thank you.
That would be one of my takeaways.
So well said. First we need to educate ourselves to learn about it, and then join the movement and take the action. But it is like time flies, 30 minutes, it's just like it's gone. And I'm like saving the best for the last, because this is something I wanted to ask you first. And thank you so much, London, for your time, for educating our audience about this critical issue during this special moment. And I look forward to maybe bringing you back soon to maybe dive into more details, because this is like so much to talk about that we cannot crunch into 30 minutes. But thank you again for being our guest. And you are watching the Miss Texas Show. And this is our first episode for the month of March, Women's History Month. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode.
Thank you.